Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thanks so much for listening. My guest for this episode is me. Actually, I get interviewed by Kiara Shannon, aka the Yogi Sommelier, for this episode. Kiara is a friend who I met because of this podcast, and that's another reason I'm grateful for this podcast. But Kiara is also an accomplished sommelier and wine consultant who brings attention and awareness to ecologically focused wine through many events and projects that she's developing and coordinating and imagining and promoting and making happen all over. She also helps wine consumers connect to wine thoughtfully by guiding mindful wine tastings and by promoting producers like me who share her values of compassion and deep connection to the earth. I highly recommend checking out what Kiara is doing with wine at the Yogi Sommelier on Instagram or her website, theyogisommelier.com. Thank you so much for doing this, Kiara. Some of the things that we talk about include how viticulture is actually a form of agroforestry, how my urban polyculture wine garden known as Crenshaw Cru embodies a vision for the future of wine, how embracing local indigenous fruit can grow a diverse, resilient, and colorful wine culture, how human culture is part of our vineyard, all of our vineyards, and how all of this results from the revolutionary ecological approach to wine that makes our current wine culture seem completely backwards. It seems kind of silly for me to introduce myself, especially since I do that in the interview, so I won't. Rather than an introduction, then, let me say thanks to the earth. Thank you, Earth, for producing vines and trees and flowers and plants and fungi and microbes and humans that give us wine. I hope all of you listening get to experience and appreciate its magic. Enjoy. Now, boom, and we're in. Thanks for doing this, Kiara.
My pleasure, Adam. As you know, I'm a huge fan of the Organic Wine Podcast, and I've listened to almost all the episodes. So I am stoked to be here.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate you doing this. And, I should just do a full confession here that this is the second time we're doing this because I was so embarrassed by my performance the first time. And so maybe the caveat that will make me feel comfortable is, anything said here is relevant only for this moment in time, and I reserve the right to change my mind. I feel like that is something that is lost in our current culture, that the right to change your mind. You know what I mean? To realize that you were wrong, like the next day, and be like, yeah, I was wrong. Like, of course, yeah, you're right. I've changed my mind. I was wrong.
Yeah, being able to admit your mistakes and acknowledge what and learn from them, and also be able to change your mind is a sign of high emotional intelligence. So
yeah, and it's like I mean I feel like it's very young to think that you won't change, or that you are the same person that you were and that you'll always be the same person. It's very, I don't know, like I grew up as an evangelical Christian. I was preaching at the age of 16, and 10 years later, I was like an atheist, growing mushrooms in Amsterdam. And it's like, if you go through those kind of changes in your life, you realize, I remember looking back and being like, I don't even know who I was 5 years ago. Like, I can't even remember what my thoughts were because I had changed so drastically. And it's, you get to that point, and I think, one of the great life lessons that I learned from that, among many, many others, was just that, like, hold things a little more loosely, like don't be so certain. Don't be so sure of yourself. You will change. And so that process continues until the day you die, basically.
Correct. And as is taught, in the wise teachings of the Buddha, attachment is the root of all suffering. Yeah. And in one very visceral way is when we attach ourselves to having to be a certain way, or resisting change that is natural. And so, yeah, I embrace it. And I'm glad that we're here to give it a do-over.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your patience.
So, Adam, I know there's probably listeners that are tuning in who have heard you many times before, but perhaps there's people that are tuning in for the first time. And so it might be good just for you to do a little introduction for all that are listening.
Yeah, I'm Adam Huss. I live in South Los Angeles, formerly known as South Central, and I am the host and creator producer of the Organic Wine Podcast, which I really do love, and not in any self-serving way, just because it's meant so much to my life and allowed me to grow and change in the ways that I want to continue doing. And I make wine with. I'm the winemaker and co-owner with my wife and partner Wendy of Centralas Wines, which we are based here in Los Angeles, and we are trying to do a bunch of cool stuff with it that highlights basically what our values are. Like I don't know. I can dig into that. Do you want me to just jump right in?
No, we can. Yeah, we'll get into that. I just wanted to ask another question kind of before we get into that, which is really kind of about, so I'm curious, what inspired you to even start doing the podcast in the first place? And reflecting back on our kind of initial conversations about change, like how has it changed, or has it changed, and have you changed? And like, what are some of the, where are you right now in the evolution?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like I knew I had a sense that I could wrap. I had a lot of technical AV IT experience in my life and career prior to that, and saw a real, it was an easy step in that direction in terms of just the logistics of it. And there's an immediacy to it. Like, I'm a writer as well, but writing is this very disconnected thing, especially if you've ever written in Hollywood. You write like a bunch of scripts that nobody ever reads, or a couple people read, and then it never becomes anything. And there's something really immediate about podcasting that I think is wonderful. And I also just wanted an excuse to invite people to talk to me, and to find a community of like-minded people by just highlighting what they're doing, by like giving people free promotion as an excuse to get to talk to them and pick their brain and learn from them. And it has been that, like, all that. I didn't even realize how amazing that would be, like how much it would sort of change me and show me strengths that I had, and things I love to do, and opportunities that to meet people, and to highlight things that I think I value deeply. I just didn't even foresee, like, some of those really great things. I guess I just had a gut idea that it would be a good way to go. And I had a friend who was like, he just did a search on, Apple Podcasts for Organic Wine Podcast. And he was like, no results, dude. Find, there's an opportunity there. And I was like, all right. I mean, he kind of just kicked me in that direction. He's one of my old friends who knows me probably better than I know myself in that sense. And yeah, I think the way that it has changed is just the name is now very misleading, but I still think it works. The name is, and I think it works because it worked for where I was at the moment that I started it, which was this gateway, this threshold moment of where you're getting into wine and you care enough to think about the fact that your grapes were grown organically, or that there is some importance to that term organic in relation to wine. And so if you're searching on podcasts and you do that search, just, it still attracts, I think, the right people who are, I mean, it still gets the right search results for those people who are at that threshold. Of course, it is just a threshold. And I think the podcast has become everything that is once you cross that threshold. and it's probably more accurate to call it like the Ecological Wine Podcast, I think, is probably the easiest way to put it, or the Ecological Soil Podcast, maybe, or the future of wine and all things, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's kind of, I agree with you. I think I feel I relate to that also because, as you know, my sort of handle in social media land on Instagram is the Yogi Sommelier. And when I started that, it really was simply because I was certified as a sommelier working in the wine business, and also a long-time yoga practitioner, and just completed my 500-hour certification. And so that was really what a lot of the content was about at the time. But now, like you, what I'm interested in and what I like to talk about and share with people is so much more than that. And that's kind of how you and I connected, really, was sort of through Media Land.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah,
so
this
I
podcast
think,
brought us together in a way
and
in
so
that sense. And
you found me because of my name, the Yogi Sommelier, and so I think it works, and
yeah,
I think it's a great way to attract people, because I do think that if um, if it was called like the Ecological Soil Future Podcast, you probably wouldn't get as many people listening. And you have to bring people in, and it's welcoming. So I have the same experience with the Yogi Sommelier. It draws people in who are interested in these things, who may not otherwise pay attention if it was more obscure. So don't get rid of it just yet.
yeah. No, I'm holding on to it, and if anything, I'll probably have to just create another whole podcast. This will become its own little thing. Yeah.
So, in terms of where you are today now, so I think, as I understand it, you started doing the podcast so you could connect with people and also learn and share information about like organic farming and natural winemaking, or organic winemaking. But now it seems like you're in a much different place. Have you shifted your attitudes about farming and winemaking in the process?
Well, I mean, the core is still there, but yeah, I mean, so the core at the time was like I cared deeply about the environment, and I cared deeply about our world more than I cared about wine. Even, I mean, I came to that realization,
Mm-hmm.
which is when I started Centralas, which was like I wanted to start a winery that wasn't about wine, that didn't center wine, that centered the world that wine grew out of. And in my in my understanding at that time, that meant like really caring about organic farming and removing these, chemical pesticides and, herbicides and chemical fertilizers from our world that are polluting our water and our air and our soil, and having all kinds of downstream effects on human health and well-being, and as well as all life health and well-being, not just us humans. And so in that sense, that really hasn't changed. But I think when we call Centralis an ecological winery, I think where I'm at with it now is it completely flipping that on its head, because it's sort of like organic is you take conventional and you try to make it better. And ecological is you start on the complete other end of the spectrum with a natural ecosystem, with the world unpolluted by human, or untainted by human attempts at agriculture, and you try to listen to it and become a student of it and learn from it, and then use your skills as a human, like our special gifts, our special human gifts, to enhance those systems to provide greater and greater abundance within that system, within the context of that system, coming from that idea of using its example and using the things that it's strong in. And if you think about conventional farming as this fragile, unsustainable, high input, pollutive system, and a natural
Mm-hmm.
system is the exact opposite. It's extremely resilient. It is long lasting. It's basically an eternal system, a continual cycle, that doesn't produce any waste and requires very little input or no input. No, it's this closed loop. And so starting from that end seems like the smart way, because there's so many more benefits. And then the only thing that it doesn't really have are these, abundant yields of things that humans can consume or drink. I mean, I guess that's a form of consuming. And so that, I think, is where I am, where I've flipped my understanding now, is that way. I think that's what ecological, that's why it's ecological. It's like coming from that direction entirely. And I, it's going back to Buddhism, it is that thing where it's like the human ego. I'm even at that point with the winemaking where I'm making wine from a vineyard now that's like over 100 years old, and there's been like these generations of a process that I'm now very fortunate to participate in. And like the first time I get grapes from there, I was like, okay, how do I, can I come out and test the grapes? Like, how do I determine when to pick and da da da? And they're like, oh, you don't determine that. Like, we tell you when it's your time to get your grapes. And I was like, what? I was like, wait a minute. I'm a control freak. I'm a winemaker. It's like there's. You understand that that's what winemaker means, right? And,
So true,
and,
so true.
and and then yeah, they're like, yeah, no. I was like, okay, so I'll try it out. And now, like, my thinking about that is completely flipped on its head as well, where I'm just like, I'm so excited to not to like have that taken out of my hands, where I'm, my winemaking is reactive rather than ego driven. It's like, let's see what this vintage brings, let's see what the grapes bring, let's see what this process, like, how do I jump into this process and enhance it, like just by wherever it is, like, and I'm just fortunate to be part of this thing that is so, so much older than I am and will last so much longer than my short life here on Earth. And so I think that's a really exciting change that's happened, I think, as well, just even in the technical winemaking, that kind of idea. So that's,
I love that. And I think I've heard you say this before, perhaps on the podcast or in person, which is shifting from sort of thinking that you're the winemaker in charge and calling the shots to where now you're the student receiving the wisdom from the plants.
Yeah. Like, I definitely feel like my viticulture has improved the less I think I know what I'm doing, and the more I pay attention, to the vines and what they're trying to say.
Yeah, and there's something that makes a lot of sense about that, because really we aren't in charge. Like, we aren't. We're just human beings on this planet, on a rock, spinning around in the cosmos, and this notion that we somehow are in charge is sort of the great lie, that leads to all the suffering that we talked about in the opening of the conversation.
Yes.
And so it makes sense that it probably feels pretty good and rather natural to sort of be in the appropriate position in the chain.
Right. Right.
Go
ahead.
I was just saying the appropriate position in the chain, sort of acting where you are. The grapes have ripened, they're picked, you're doing what you can, and you're just going to kind of pass the energy along and give it what you can give it. It's a more natural way to operate.
Yeah, it is. And it's, I mean, being here in Southern California, that idea, the analogy of surfing is, I think, a good one, an appropriate one, where, you as a surfer, you learn to read the ocean, you learn a different language, which is like this language of waves, and you become a better surfer the more you learn to go with the flow and respond, rather than, I mean, you can't control the ocean, you can't control it. You're floating on it. It's your whole ride, and then you get these moments of joy when you finally have that synergy and catch it at the right moment, kind of thing. And I think that's, I don't know, it's I'm not like a big surfer or anything, but I think it's a great analogy for that shift in thinking as well. Well, just come on, I got to give a plug for surfing and so.
Of course, and also just any all different examples of when we are just sort of put in awe of nature and its power, whether it's surfing or kind of climbing a mountain, or these wonders really remind us of our sort of insignificant place in the world, but also could be a great source of inspiration and just sort of consciousness, so that we can take conscious action rather than just doing what we think we have to do to meet these certain standards that we've invented.
Another analogy that I think applies really well is that of learning a language, where it's it's this, I mean, I always say, like, if you get those quizzes where it's like, what would be your superpower if you could be if you were going to be a superhero, what would your superpower be? And like, really, from the first time I heard that, I was like, the superpower that I've always wanted was the ability to speak every language wherever I went and just be fluent in it. And because like the world would open up to you, and and in a sense, like, I was just thinking about these human cultures, but it's like, if you could speak the language of plants, if you could speak all these sort of subtle languages that are more figurative, that would be an incredible thing. And I think that's, I think learning that language, it's like, how do you know when you're fluent in something? Like, what is that threshold? How long does that take? How many hours to gain fluency? And I guess, like, I'm still in the process of that with vines and that natural world, for sure.
Well, one thing that's really enchanted me about wine is how it can help as a facilitator for communication and connection, even despite language barriers. When you can travel to a foreign place, and if there's wine on the table, everyone is connected and kind of communicating in a way, even without language. And I think that's something about it that has part of what makes it so unique, and something that has been so special and sacred over like thousands of years is this connective power that it has, and how it can transmit, through communion and through, through sharing. It can transmit this kind of human, this sort of universal feeling of human connection. And it's not just any beverage.
Yeah. No, I mean, wine, I love anthropomorphizing vines, grapevines, because I like this story that they are really the reason that I'm into wine and making wine at all, because I think they dangle these lures out there like fishermen, they're like, and you come upon them by fate and by chance, and you swallow them, and you've grown with pleasure, and you have no idea why this like magical experience is happening. And if you're the right person, it just blows open, your curiosity, and you start rabbit holing and end up suddenly starting a podcast and a winery.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to,
15 years later, or 20 years down the road.
Yeah, so true. I mean, so like bring it back to earth a little bit. So how are you doing this? So I know some people, growing grapes and having a permaculture garden in South Los Angeles is not something that everyone is doing. And so what you have is very unique. And I'm just curious, and perhaps others who are listening might be curious, like, what exactly are you doing there? Like, how are you creating this place in where that's called Centralas?
Yeah, I mean that. I guess I mean with our yard, with what we call Crenshaw Cru, which is our our lot that it was grass with like there's one orange tree that we've kept, and the rest of it is all new plantings of things, many things, and we've basically converted it into what we call a perennial wine garden, a polyculture. It's polyculture, it's permaculture, it's all these things. It's these essentially, like I said, starting with a forest ecosystem and trying to reimagine, trying to enhance that and develop it in a way that it makes it a little more abundant. It makes it a little more fruitful, that in the way that human desirable fruit kind of thing. And but really, I think it started with just wanting to grow our own stuff that we could cook with, because I love cooking, and I wanted anytime you get into whether it's wine or cooking or whatever, that it's the ingredients that makes the difference. It's like having a fresh, deliciously ripe thing is the dish. Like, like you look at Alice Waters cooking, it's just like you serve a peach if it's grown well and it's perfectly ripe. Like, like the natural food is just it's its own delicacy. It's incredible. And then if you just bring your own human skill to bear, your gifts as a human to bear on these things, like, so that's what I really wanted to do. And it wanted to have these incredible ingredients to use in my life, because I'm kind of a hedonist, chef, winemaker, lover, and it will just the more pleasure, like the better you grow it, the more delicious it is. And because it's only like a small LA lot, it was about packing as much into that as possible while still allowing enough light for everything to grow well, and then thinking all at the same time about how these things can benefit each other, and how to plant things that are water wise, that are actually adapted to this climate, and that also sort of function in the layout of our yard, so that we could have things like evergreen things in the front yard, so that it would look good, so we wouldn't have these sort of like half the year to sort of empty trees because all the leaves had fallen off. But we would always have like a nice curb appeal in the front. So it's a weird thing to think about, but when you live in a city, it's something, I think it's a consideration out of just being considerate with your neighbors and the look of your neighborhood. You want something that looks beautiful and lovely. as much as possible. I mean, our yard is definitely a little messier than probably some of our neighbors would like. But and then things like planting big shady trees on the southwest corner of the yard, so that you have this sort of passive solar where in the summer you get these nice shade, and then the leaves fall, and in the winter you get the warmth from the sun because the leaves have fallen, and just creating like micro climates within your tiny little thing. And so now that 10 years after the majority of these plantings started, we have this kind of like becoming mature food forest, wine garden, I call it. Wine forest is probably a better way to call it, but it's too small for a forest maybe, so wine garden. And I'm realizing like all of these things could actually apply at scale potentially. Like I just sort of realized, like we're now in this situation where in California, I mean, in wine in general, historically, we've always wanted to expose wine, vines to as much sunlight as possible, because you need that to ripen the grapes. And traditionally, the riper the grapes the better, because so much of that tradition comes from Europe, which is so much further north than us. But here in California, for a long time now, enough sun hasn't been the issue. And in fact, I now think we're at a time where we're investigating a lot of ways to increase shade. Well, and that's how we're going to maintain quality and enhance quality, is by increasing the shade. And so I'm just realizing how important trees are to vines. I mean, they evolve together. They're symbiotic creatures. That is the way that vines have traditionally in a forest ecosystem found the way to get up to the sunlight that they need to create their food and to feed their microbes, is to climb on a tree. And they don't hurt a tree, like they don't constrict trees. It's truly symbiotic, and down in the soil, they're just feeding each other and cooperating. And then the vine is using and has learned to grow a little quicker than trees, so it can climb up to the top of the tree as the tree is growing and stay up there in the canopy of the tree to get the sunlight, so it doesn't get out competed by these big canopy trees. And so the more that we can incorporate them into vineyards, I think the better. And now we have this great opportunity where I don't think you have to like, I'm really excited about at some point, and I'm trying to become an expert in growing vines in trees, and how to make that work in a vineyard system. How do you net for birds if your vines are grown in trees, or how do you harvest, easily and like at scale if you have vine trained trees? Like, how do you do that? But I think there's ways, just like with Crenshaw Cru, to build these little plots that have trees, which are now south side trees are mature enough that they're starting to provide shade during the hottest part of the day for these vines, and it's actually perfect. And you could replicate that in vineyards, especially if you're instigating a new vineyard. You could build it in little plots where there are south side tree rows that provide shade, or you could just sort of break up the vineyard with trees that will eventually spread out and provide shade in the middle of the day. And potentially have a double crop too, because those trees could be fruiting trees. They could be avocado, they could be lots of different things. Things that are maybe in California, pomegranate is better, or fig or something like that, where they don't need much water. But I'm just seeing all these potential things now that Crenshaw Cru has matured, and we're still planting, we're always planting. And I think that's another thing that I've learned, just like we've been talking about, being able to make mistakes, is like, the look of our garden has changed repeatedly as I've learned, as I've like realized, I planted this too close to that, and I've had to cut down a tree. It's like, always had to cut down a tree, but it's part of learning that learning process. When you're the one that planted it, maybe it's okay to cut it down as well. Anyway, those are some of the things that are happening. So we have a ton of vines. We make a small amount of wine that becomes right now sparkling rosé. Really beautiful. As far as I know, the first commercial wine made in South Central, that we call Crenshaw Cru. And I also made a red from the vines as well. So we have right now vinifera. Honestly, I planted the backyard maybe 3 months before my mind even changed again. This is I mean, this is just a theme now of changing my mind and learning more. And I would have planted a hybrid vine or a native vine or something. Yeah, something with native genetics would have gone in the backyard if I'd waited just a few more months. But planted something with really drought tolerant rootstock, narrow davula, that is from the southernmost part. It's the vinifera that's adapted to the southernmost part of Europe. So I think it's, it'll do great here. I'm
So you
not
have
worried about it.
Davula growing in the backyard, and is it Syrah in
Syrah
the front
in
yard?
front. Yeah, we have a little patch of Sangiovese, 3 vines. And then we have some what I call decorative Pinot Noir that has, we've been training it over a pergola. So, it's another one of those. It provides lovely shade and a great place to taste wine, literally under grapevines, out in our back area. And then I've thrown a bunch of seeds out, so there's a ton of vines just sprouting up from seed at the back that I'm sort of letting go wild. There's like a mission cutting from like the Lone Wolf Vineyard, if you've heard of that. So that's planted, and yeah, lots of
Awesome.
different things. Yeah,
Yeah.
so we'll see what happens
Cool.
with all that.
Yeah. And I know that you've talked about this a lot. I mean, this has become a big theme on the Organic Wine podcast. And you and I have talked about this too, but also branching out beyond the grape when we think about wine, and thinking
Good
about
point.
co-ferments and
Yeah.
ciders. And I know that you've started to do that too in some of the wines that you're making, right?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the other thing too, is like, I because I'm in this thing, I forget to say that, but my understanding of a vineyard is not just rows of vines. It is like it's this dawning realization once you start understanding soil ecosystem, soil microbiology, and then how that expands it's weird. Like you go back to the soil and it expands your whole world, and you realize, okay, the vines are part of this bigger ecosystem, and then trees contribute to that, and everything contributes to that, and it expands beyond, just what the rows of vines are, to include all the animals that participate, all the plants that participate, and then the humans. Like us humans make a huge difference on an ecosystem, and we are part of that ecosystem, and the kind of impact that we make is in large part determined by our culture, the culture that we are growing out of. And so our culture becomes part of that ecosystem. And by tending our culture, we're literally tending our vineyard, because the choices that we make of what to spray, of what kind of fertilizers we're using, of that idea, just the way that we think about viticulture is determined by this culture that we grew up in. And examining that and thinking about how that can limit us or be detrimental to the idea of viticulture is, I think, a really important thing. And that's, obviously a big part of the process that I've been involved with through wine and through this podcast. And so I think that's really important to think about. And so within our vineyard, and just within Crenshaw Cru, we have all these other fruit trees. And so, yeah, like I just started looking around and being like, I think this is that ecological approach, is like, what is happening already in nature around you, and working with that, rather than coming in and being like, I'm going to clear out nature and impose my ego on this soil and plant vines of this kind, one of 5 French varieties,
Yeah,
usually.
right.
um, and the flip of that is like, let's look at this landscape, see what is already happening there, and see how we can build on that. How can we just like enhance that? And so, I kind of repeating myself there, but the way I approach that in an urban place where I live is there, I look around the neighborhood, I walk around the neighborhood, and there's tons of fruit trees that have been here for decades, and a lot of that fruit is just rotting on the tree. And so I started, I'm starting small and just talking like, so we have an apple tree. So I started asking neighbors about if anybody had any apple trees. So my neighbor across the street donated their apple tree this year. Another neighbor not too far south of here donated their apple tree. And so we made a cider from just neighborhood apples and some Crenshaw Cru apples. And then I threw in some pomegranates because I wanted it to be, like a rosé cider. That didn't quite work out, but it added something unique and kind of fun to it. So it's and I think next year I'll probably get there. I'll just like wait a little bit longer, wait for the pomegranates to get a little bit, or a few more of the pomegranates to get ripe before adding them. And but yeah, it's already in bottle, sparkling, delicious, and yeah, it's I like a beautiful cider from South Central, and then we am making like an orange cider similarly, because there's just tons of citrus fruit around the neighborhood. So I'm experimenting with different recipes to make that palatable, because the citric acid can be a real intense, almost bitter sort of sourness that isn't super pleasant once you ferment the sugar out. But now I'm finding like just aging on lees for a while is actually turning
Hmm.
it into something kind
Yeah.
of sublime and fascinating and creamy, and it's almost like an like a if you could cross a creamsicle and a mimosa kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Like
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
um
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Totally.
yeah, some fun stuff. Yeah, stuff like that. Just trying to like, and then of course, we work with prickly pears, and prickly pears are native to this land. And I just happened to stumble upon this incredible orchard of prickly pears out on the coast in Rancho Palos Verdes, which is that I may not be able to source from them ever again, because it's becoming an ecological preserve, actually, which is wonderful. I mean, it's sad if I don't get to get the prickly pears. I'm
Mhm.
talking with the city about being given permission to do that, but um, essentially, it's this historic farm. So all of Rancho Palos Verdes was farms that were leased by Japanese American families up to World War II, and then they were kicked off and sent to internment camps. And this one guy came back after World War II and started leasing some land and started farming it, and kept that lease basically up until the 2000s, his family, and then transferred or sublet it to a Mexican guy named Martin, who I met. And the lease for Martin was just taken away from him in this summer. So that place has was this historic farm. They're in process of making it a historic landmark, the Hutano farm. And Martin was the guy who gave me permission to harvest his prickly pears, which basically just growing. It's magical. It's a flower farm growing, hundreds of
Wow.
feet up on cliffs over the ocean, with views of like whales and
Mm.
Catalina, and the ocean breeze is just cool all day. And it's they Martin planted those prickly pear. I mean, there's tons of native prickly pear around there as well, so it's actually like a really diverse prickly pear area. Strangely, I mean, it's like
Mm.
this
Mhm.
amazing amazing like ecological place, because there's at least three different species of prickly pear growing all on this hillside, and flowers, and it's kind of magical. Honestly, you're there, and it's like, and the other thing is, it's right out on the coast, so it can be like 90 degrees here at Crenshaw Cru, and then I take Crenshaw south, and it literally ends almost at the farm on Rancho Palos Verdes, and it's like 72 degrees because of the ocean breeze, and it's gorgeous, and I'm out there picking prickly pears, in these like 8 foot tall corridors that have been macheted out to be able to just access them at all, because they're now 20-year-old or plus prickly pears, the ones that Martin planted, and they're all different colors, and every color is a different flavor, the fruit that is. And yeah, that's been something really fun to just tell that story, and blend those with some white grapes that are grown here in Southern California as well, and make some really fun stuff. Last year it turned into a sort of a yellow orange, sort of bright colored thing that we're almost sold out of. And now I have a barrel from this year that's like hot pink, because I just picked the
Hmm.
magenta ones,
Mhm.
and blended with muscat. And yeah, it smells like guava and looks like, I mean, it's hot pink. It's amazing. So I'm
Wow.
excited by it. Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, I've had your prickly pear wine and it's delicious, and I love introducing it to people because I think it's really a great, talking about thresholds. It's a really great way to get this conversation going with people about appreciating wine and its great diverse
Yeah.
potential.
I mean, I just
So I'm
really,
excited to try the pink one.
yeah, yeah. I
I
mean, and
can't wait.
part of that was just like, I wanted, I wanted to showcase fruit. I mean, we're in this horrible drought. I mean, horrible. I mean, this long, extreme drought that will probably get worse, and our climate will probably change, for our lifetime. I mean, we'll see it get hotter and drier,
Hmm.
and with less water. And I, I, I mean, frankly, there's a survival aspect of it too. It's like, we need to learn to make wine from things besides something that needs to be irrigated to
Right.
survive.
Yeah. And
and
appreciate them. And people need
and
to learn that.
appreciate it. Yeah, learn
Yeah,
how to
there's,
work with them, learn what their strengths and
yeah,
weaknesses are. Like getting good at making wine with a fruit takes a while. You have to
right.
learn what what it does and how it reacts, and how it ages and things like that. It's so, I just wanted to start that process and start that story about, hey, this thing is never sprayed, it's never watered, it's abundant, it's delicious, and here it is.
Yeah.
Um,
I hope the
so
city lets you I I'm confident. Keep pushing. I think if
yeah,
you keep pushing, that they'll let you farm it. I mean, I think that's really something that would be desirable. I would hope would be that someone would tend the land,
yeah,
even within the constraints that there may be for it being a nature preserve. I still think there's a way. I would hope for that relationship to continue, because it really sounds like an amazing place and an amazing resource, and so keep asking.
yeah, definitely. No, I've offered them, to like make a contribution for every bottle sold, to use the wine
Yeah,
as a way to tell the story of their
totally.
ecological preserve and that historic landmark, which is what I want to do with it anyway, which I think, it's just like serves both of our purposes, really. I mean, so
That would be great.
yeah,
That's a great idea. I mean, I know that those types of relationships exist with other nature preserves. There's
yeah,
other examples out there, but I'm optimistic. I think that would be amazing if you could do that.
yeah,
I would like to go there. I've actually never been to, because I believe you can actually go and there's like hikes and you can walk around that
yeah.
area.
Yep,
Yeah,
it's called the
yeah.
Prickly Pear
The
Trail,
Prickly Pear
actually.
Trail, the Prickly Pear Trail out in Palos Verdes
Yep, yep. It's
for
right
people who
by
are
the City
listening.
Hall. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, well, such amazing stuff. You're here in LA, and how can people get in touch with you if they want to try your wines or learn more, or any of these things?
Yeah.
What's the best
Uh,
way?
uh, we're on Instagram at Centralas Wine or at Organic Wine Podcast if you're interested in the podcast. Website is centralaswine.com, and it's Centralas with two A's, Centralas wine.com. That's probably the best way.
And
Everything's
you're
there.
doing and on there, I know you have some events coming up in town.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
couple, right? You have a couple
Yeah,
coming up,
totally. Yeah, that's right.
including one with me, which is going to be super
Yes.
fun.
Yeah.
Talk about. I was also going to open it up to final thoughts and remarks if you
Yeah.
had
I
it.
mean, I mean, I think, I probably reiterated this mindset shift that I've undergone, and how I'm trying to represent that in wine. But I think this vision, I could probably try to convey this vision that I have for the future of wine, which is more and more people, more and more winemakers thinking about wine this way, where instead of like, I know vinifera is wonderful, and nothing I've said is meant to disparage vinifera. I love vinifera. It's what made me fall in love with wine. It's what lured me to my destruction, which is why I have a vinifera wine called Siren that I'm selling. But France and Italy and Germany and Spain do it really well and have for a long time. And I think we have our own indigenous wine culture here that is just at the beginning. We haven't
Hmm.
we haven't even explored what it could be to any real deep degree. I mean, I talk about breeding grapes. I think like every viticulture, everybody who's into wine should learn to breed grapes. I know it sounds like a big deal, but it's actually much easier than you'd think. And start crossing our indigenous grapes with whatever you like, to get whatever results you think would be beneficial for where you are if you're into grapes, but also to keep an open mind to everything else, all the other ingredients, because when I come to your town, I don't want to taste another French wine grown in your town. I want to taste what your town tastes like. I want to taste wine that can only come from where you are. And that's what I'm trying to do here. It's like if we all start doing that, I mean, what a diverse, beautiful, colorful rainbow of experience you can have in the wine world if we all start thinking, and heading in that direction, rather than just people. I won't give the alternative, because I think we've been living in the alternative, and everybody knows the alternative for the last 70 years, and I think like it's really beautiful time for a change, and I think it is happening already. So I'm really excited to see what happens, and hopefully be fortunate to be part of it to some degree.
Yes, you're definitely part of it. I think in LA, you're certainly leading the way in this movement, and it's really exciting for me to, learn from you and see everything that you're doing and taste the many iterations of what comes from Crenshaw Cru and Centralas along the way. So, yeah. Great. Well, on that note, Adam, thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, Kiara. Appreciate it. Thank you. The sponsor for this episode is, surprise, surprise, Centralas. A couple things that you didn't learn about Centralas from this episode is that we list every ingredient we use on the labels of our bottles, and we don't list any grape or fruit varieties on our labels, like Petite Pearl or Kingston Black. We list every ingredient on the label of every bottle of wine, including what we use for tirage or dosage, because we believe in transparency and we want to eliminate natural washing. We don't list grape varieties for many reasons, grape or other fruit varieties, because nature doesn't have a favorite variety of grape, for example. It grows many, many varieties of grapes and selects the ones that are best adapted to where they grow at that time in history. When times change, nature selects new grapes that thrive in new conditions. We want to emulate nature and think that ending our varietal obsession is a step in that direction. To learn more, buy our wines, join our wine club, or join our email list, please visit centralaswine.com. That's CENTRALAS wine.com. Thank you so much for your support.